I think the laziness of discouragement is very much underpins the other lazinesses, whereby we procrastinate and get caught up on other things, because at some level we are discouraged. In other words, we think, what's the point of meditating? I know there's a point, but come on, is this meditation really going to be the one that's going to change things for me? Do you see what I'm saying? Like in general, we know meditation is good, but does this one matter? This one? If I don't do this one, who cares? So where does this discouragement come from? So, of course, there are many sources to these things, many ways we can approach this. But basically, I think, well, all roads, all problems, we might say, all roads of problems, they all lead to self-grasping ignorance and self-cherishing. The root delusion, which, when we look at ourself, basically means that there is an appearance to our mind of an ordinary self with faults and limitations. That self is appearing to us with maybe more faults some days and less faults on other days, but is always appearing. There's always an ordinary self that is appearing to our mind, and it's appearing to be who I really am. It's appearing to be the real me. It appears that way. We don't recognize that it's just a projection of our mind. We think there is a real, fixed, ordinary self, and our self-grasping ignorance believes that self to be the truth. I am an intrinsically ordinary person with these intrinsic faults and limitations, a traumatized past or overwhelmed past, or certain difficulties that I've encountered, certain tendencies I have. I've tried to shake them. I've gone on this course and that course, but I haven't been able to get rid of them. It's just who I am. Grasp. And next one, self-cherishing, right? Then we cherish that limited, vulnerable, overwhelmed self as being who we are, and it's really important. It seems so important that I think about that self, that I view reality from the perspective of that self, and think about how I can make that self more comfortable and how I can get rid of that self's problems. So what does this lead to? Well, fundamentally what it leads to is distraction. Distraction. Always worrying about the self. For example, when Geshe Kelsang describes the self that we cherish within the mind of self-cherishing, he calls it the self that we cherish. Always thinking I. Always thinking I. Ask yourself, does that basically describe my life? Just that phrase, always thinking I. Now you might say, well, actually I worry a lot about this other person who happens to be very close to I. Yeah, of course, we have attachment for certain people because they are close to us. They're important people because they're close to me, so they're almost like extensions of self. They're me and mine, my friend. But essentially, we are so rooted in that perception of this limited, fixed self, worrying about it all the time. And to the extent to which we grasp at that self, to that extent, we grasp at ourself as being unable to change. In understanding the mind, Geshe talks about one of the secondary delusions, which is distraction. There are 20 secondary delusions described. One of them is distraction. It gives a very brief description of it. The definition of distraction is a deluded mental factor that wanders to any object of delusion. Distraction makes us lose our concentration on our spiritual practice by causing our mind to wander to a contaminated object, such as a samsaric place, a samsaric body, or a samsaric enjoyment. Sometimes all three at the same time. Geshe doesn't say that, that's me. Ignore that. Yeah, distraction makes us lose our concentration on our spiritual practice by causing our mind to wander to a contaminated object. Contaminated object means an object created by delusion. So it's not an object that's going to generate happiness, although especially objects of desirous attachment, they promise a lot, don't they? And that can definitely happen within our meditation session. Geshe talks about this, how, he says desirous attachment is a big obstacle to our meditation practice, and it can even arise within our meditation practice. Sometimes we're at that point where we're like, okay, I'm having a good meditation. Ooh, that's an interesting object of attachment that's just appeared there. I know I should not investigate it now because I know where it's going to take me, but you know what? Just this once. And off we go. And it's kind of interesting, doesn't it? Because at some level it's indicating that we don't value that meditation session. Would you agree with that? We don't really believe that that particular meditation session has any power. You know the analogy, right? Geshe is given of actually comes from the famous story about a sangha, water dripping on rock. And one drop of water on rock doesn't do much, right? Nothing, seemingly, from our point of view. But continuous drips of water on rock and eventually will erode rock. Continuous, drop by drop of virtuous object, Dharma mind, on our rock-like deluded mind will erode away those delusions, but not if you shut down the dripping, then nothing will happen other than the continuation of delusion. And that's very dangerous because right now we have a precious human life. Right now, everything has come together. Right now, we have met Buddha Shakyamuni's doctrine as we meditated on this morning. Right now, we are unbelievably fortunate. Right now, literally, the door to liberation is open. And we just have to go on the path that will take us out through that door to enlightenment. And I believe we need to value the power of our meditations to transform our mind. And really so much of what we're going to be exploring is just that, allowing ourselves to deeply appreciate what we have within our meditation practice so that we want to engage in it. So we'll be talking more about distraction as well in the next session, and probably in the last session as well, because it is did I even finish reading that? I don't think I did. Distraction makes us lose our concentration on our spiritual practice, or makes us forget where we were. Distraction makes us lose our concentration on our spiritual practice by causing our mind to wander to a contaminated object, such as a samsaric place, body, or enjoyment. The object of distraction can be an object of anger, an object of attachment, or an object of ignorance. Distraction is the worst obstacle to our spiritual development. You thought it was your neighbor, or whoever, whatever. But no, distraction is the worst obstacle to our spiritual development. Why? because our mind goes to our objects of delusion. And in many cases, sometimes we really get caught up in our anger or really get caught up in our desires and attachment. But in many cases, it's just brief visits, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and oh, that reminds me of what I watched the other day, and oh no, these people have said this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Oop, meditation time up. Geshe said, he called it a thief that steals our concentration, steals our mindfulness. He says, we must apply effort to be free from distraction when we engage in recitation, contemplation, and meditation. Please keep this advice in your heart. If we allow clouds of distraction in our minds, the sun of our Dharma practice cannot shine.